Hello and welcome to Music Rewind, a podcast where we look to tell the stories behind our favorite albums. I'm your host, Steve Epley, and in each episode I will invite a guest to tell us about their favorite music album, how they discovered it, and what makes it special to them. Joining me today is another old friend from my high school days, the infamous Danny Prokup. Danny works in advertising as a copywriter up in Chicago, where he lives with his wonderful wife and kids. Music has been a passion for Danny all his life, and his memories are often soundtracked by what was playing at the time. And lastly, he is another sports legend out of Hall High School. Welcome, Danny, and thank you for being on the show.
Steve, what's going on, man? First of all, infamous, like Mobb Deep, huh? I don't know if I'm brave enough to ask what give me that distinction, or
it's more than famous.
Yeah, but I don't know how. And did you say sports legend, Steve? I think we're stretching the definition of the word legend with that one there.
My handful of listeners in the Illinois Valley will understand.
Nah, yeah, they're going to be the ones complaining in the comments.
I'm sure they are pumping this podcast through at Rips every week. You know,
yeah, and everyone's going to say, "Who in the hell is that guy?" Didn't he sit the bench?
Those guys for the '90s, you know. Way back then.
Man,
yeah.
We're old. Yeah, thanks for having me on, Steve. This is awesome. Looking forward to talking music with you.
Yeah, this is going to be a fun episode. All right, Dan, let's jump right into this. What is your favorite album and how did you discover it?
Well, first of all, I got to set the tone here, because when you asked me to be on, I did, we were talking about this a little bit. I had a list of, I kid you not, I think I narrowed it down from 50, and I'm still going back and forth on it until we got on. And that's not to take away from the record I want to talk about, but just to tell you why I want to talk about it. And I want to talk about Sunny Day Real Estate's Diary. For those of you who don't know, Steve, and I don't know how much you know about the record, but sort of a classic to me. I mean, now it's been, and I guess at the time it was too, but I didn't really know sort of the overall aesthetic or the storyline around it really. But it's become, or most people talk about it as like the cornerstone of this new, or at the time, the newer like emo sound. It was sort of the link between sort of the post-punk or hardcore kind of emo thing. You know, Midwest emo is a term I've heard a lot. But at the time, to me, it was just really, it came out at a time where it really spoke to me. So I'm looking forward to diving into you with it, man.
Yeah, this was a surprise to me because I had never really dove into this group at all.
Yeah.
They kind of completely blew past me. And when I listened to it, my first thoughts were the early 2000s emo. And, you know, bands such as Brand New and a few others I was like, there's a connection here. This is maybe the same time. And then I looked, no, this was released in 1994.
Yeah.
That blew me away. I had no idea that this album was out there in the 90s or that early, because it sounds exactly like, say, Brand New or Jimmy Eat World or some early MCR and some of those other bands. So, yeah, I could totally see why this was a game changer for the emo scene.
Well, and what's odd, or I guess not odd, but the way that I came to it, or the way that I fell in love with it, was completely separate from the emo scene, if you will. And I know a lot of that, that stuff came later. But to me, this, I remember, I believe I saw the video. I'm assuming that I saw the video for 7 or In Circles on 120 Minutes, the bad, before pre-internet and staying up late on Saturday nights, MTV in the Illinois Valley.
I have watched that recently because it's on YouTube, the 120 Minutes performance of them, like live.
Yeah.
So I have seen that, in the past 24 hours.
All right, there you go. But at the time, this record comes out in 94, like the spring of 94, and it's Sub Pop, it's Seattle. But it's sort of, going back to the spring of 94, it comes out just after. So Nirvana's over. Cobain dies, I think, a month before this record comes out.
Oh, wow.
And it really to me, it had nothing to do with, because we all grew up on that same music, right? It's Nirvana and Soundgarden, the Seattle Sound and all those bands.
I didn't know this was Seattle.
Yeah. And what's crazy to me is I think that's what got me into it. It had to be, is because it was on Sub Pop. I think it was just at a time where, I bought it at the cassette at Disc Jockey in the Peru Mall, shout out to the Peru Mall. And I think it had to be just like I said, I don't really remember, but my assumption is that I had to see the video on 120 minutes, bought the cassette, and the artwork, the cover is the Fisher Price. I don't know if you remember growing up.
Little People.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And my cousin was younger and he loved those growing up. And like, there's a toaster on fire and like just weird sort of, there was no pictures of the band. There were no, I don't believe on the back of the cassette, like there were song titles or anything. And it was a black Sub Pop cassette. It was just like so strange. But I remember what hit me about it is when you put it on, it was very aggressive, very melodic, heavier music, which I love. Some of my early, like Injustice for All from Metallica is a cornerstone record for me. Those early Soundgarden records, some of the, harder stuff. But then that with the, juxtaposed to the lyrics, this more of a, it's a voice that you're not really prepared for it when you first hear it. And I mean that in the best way possible, because it doesn't necessarily go with the music. To me, it sort of reminded me, and I'm not comparing the vocal stylings of the lead singer, Jeremy, with either of these singers, but it reminded me of like the first time of like hearing the Smiths, where you get this jangly, upbeat music. And then all of a sudden, Morrissey's, iconic vocal stylings, but it takes a while for that to sort of link.
Kind of similar to like Death Cab for Cutie. Where there's you've got those very, angsty emotional melodies that are, really leading in. And then you get this voice that just like, oh, I wasn't expecting that voice at all.
Totally. And I think there's a great band too, out of Chicago around this same time called the Smoking Popes, who are still around today. If folks might remember, I think they had a song on the Clueless soundtrack was their claim to fame at one point. But they were pretty big. And like I said, they're still around today.
I've heard of them, but I couldn't tell you a song.
But they have a very similar approach. They're more pop, they're more straight ahead punk and pop punk, I guess you would call it. But the singer has more of that laid back sort of approach. And again, the lead singer, Jeremy Anick from Sunny Day, doesn't have that styling, but it's sort of that on paper, it doesn't seem like it should work. And it just did for me. And it was just so, I don't know. It just blew me away. I think, you put the record on.
It's very unique for the music that was popular at that time, the rock music. I mean, because I can't compare this to Soundgarden or Nirvana or the Pumpkins or even Green Day. It's unique when compared to those popular bands of the time.
It's interesting when you said Pumpkins, and I've been going back and spending more time with it. And, another favorite record of mine is Siamese Dreams from the Pumpkins. And to me, and I think, going back to sort of emo and when I started talking about getting into this record, to me, I think one of the reasons why I like this record so much, and there's many of them that I hope to fit in, but it was just sort of, it did remind me of Siamese in a way that, you take a song like Today and you hear it and it became like this celebratory thing. And then you sit down and you listen to the lyrics and it's, pink ribbon scars that never forget, my angel wings are bruised and restrained. My belly stings.
It's dark.
And you're like, whoa,
it's super dark.
Yeah. And it's just, I think Siamese is a masterpiece. And to me, this record Diary shares DNA with that record. To me, anyway, see that in my head. And I think, some of the softer singing from Billy, and even when he lets go and he starts shredding his voice and all that stuff, very much reminds me of sort of what Jeremy, is doing on this record. And it really, going back now, those bands you brought up, Brand New and Jimmy Eat World. There's actually this great book by Andy Greenwald, the pop critic, or pop culture critic, called Nothing Feels Good. And it's sort of a history of this emo scene, bands like Jawbreaker and The Promise Ring from Milwaukee. who sort of laid the groundwork for, if you will, for these other bands that came along. And I'm not well versed in emo at all. So if, for the listeners out there who are screaming at me that I'm getting all this information wrong about emo, I apologize. But to me, coming from that grunge, classic rock, at this time too, this is 94. So, 13, 14 years old. And like I said, we're seeing the tail end. Like I said, Cobain just died, which really, honestly for me, I remember it like it was yesterday. But it's also sort of that you're starting to see the cracks in the facade of, and some of those newer bands coming up. You're starting to get like your Limp Bizkits and some of your other, bands clinging on to grunge, to that sound, but that they didn't really have sort of it almost became formulaic.
I know exactly what you mean.
Yeah. And to me, Diary just represented, it was taking elements of that, elements of sort of the punk, like Fugazi, some of those bands but it also they were accomplished musicians. So it had some twinges of 70s prog in there almost. It was just, there was a scope and a passion and, emotion, sorry, to go on the emo, but there was, they bring a lot to the table.
I mean, overall, I'll say it's an excellent album.
Thank you.
But it's not a but. It's an excellent album, and the emotion that you mentioned is there. There's some angst. It's heavy. If the lyrics spoke to you in high school, I'm sorry I wasn't there for you, man.
No, well,
I don't know what this dude was going through at the time, but there's what was the name of that book you just mentioned?
Oh, it's called Nothing Feels Good, and I think
that could have been the name of this album.
Yeah. and I get that's why people love it and with emo, but to me, I think at the time, and I'm gonna quote Andy Greenwald here, but not quote him, I guess I'm gonna paraphrase something that he wrote in the book, but it was something along the lines of that Jeremy was just so intense and so passionate that he almost loses track of language. Like the lyrics to me, it was like almost he's inventing words sometimes, or you can't really tell what he's singing, unless you dive in. And to me, I think that's what made it even more sort of accessible, if you will, because it was almost just that blank slate of, you're a teenager, there's pent up emotions. There's, I love Nirvana with all my heart, but, load up on guns and bring your friends. It's time to lose and to pretend. Yeah. Not to take anything away from Kurt, but that's very specific. It doesn't, not necessarily speaking to me and what I'm going through. And not that Jeremy was or wasn't, but just that release and that emotional release of, you could sing along because you could sing anything you wanted to it and it still made sense.
Yeah. The way I prepare for these shows, I'll listen to the album and then I will eventually listen to the album with the lyrics in front of me, which has helped tremendously on some albums like Pearl Jam and Radiohead, where you've got some mumblers and some whiners and just, they're different styles of singing that I don't, on initial listen, I'm loving the music and I'm loving the way the lyrics fit in the song, but I may not be understanding every word and getting that poetry that someone has written. So I do like watching the lyrics so that I can get that full experience. And then looking at the lyrics of this album, I mean, like I said, he does make up some words and some of them are just completely indecipherable.
Yeah. And I think, not to take anything away from, I'm sure he's, Jeremy's going to listen. Not to take anything away from him or as a lyricist or anyone else, but
you're welcome to come on the show, Jeremy.
Yes, please.
We'll bring Danny back. Yeah, you guys can talk it out.
Yeah, you can yell at me and all my accomplishments as a songwriter. But you're right. I think what was, and there are some great things, like in Circles. I think if there was, like you were saying before, Nothing Feels Good. The line. I dream to heal your wounds, but I bleed myself. Sort of, if that's not an emo banner, I'm not sure what is. So there is a lot of that. And when you dive down in it, yes, it makes sense, and walking around in circles and, so many different things that he talks about, or he's singing, and Dan Horner, the other guitarist, who's doing sort of the backing vocals and that interplay that, again, that you see in bands like Brand New and Taking Back Sunday and stuff. They are saying something, and I think they are saying something real. But again, I think it's just that, it is almost that feeling of being, a teenager where you're maybe so frustrated or so sad or so angry, or, everything's jumbled up in your head that you just need that release. And I think that's what maybe spoke to me at the time, looking back on it, but it was just the music and the interplay. I mean, there's such great musicians. I think if anybody knows the band or maybe knows the story by now, but then Nate Mendel, the bass player, is a fantastic bass player. Been the bass player in the Foo Fighters since the beginning, and Will Goldsmith, the drummer. So Will and Nate then left and joined Foo Fighters. They were like the original band Dave put together.
Oh, I did not know that.
So it's like, I mean, obviously accomplished musicians, but I think just the way that they flowed together and it all fit together really just sort of spoke to me. Again, it's just that scope of their playing. I don't know. It works for me.
So when you listen to this album, do you go front to back, or do you pick out select tracks?
No, I totally go front to back. And what's weird is when I was going through trying to pick my records, one of the criteria was, can I sit down and listen to it? Or how often do I sit down and listen to it all the way through to even be in the running? And I think what is important with this one to listen to all the way through is in those first few minutes when it starts, I think just like when 7 hits, you know what you're in for. And then it takes this weird, it's sort of straight ahead driving guitar. And then it takes this weird sort of time signature change. Nate's bass comes in, is just phenomenal on it. And then then it almost stops and you hear Jeremy's voice. And then it just flows from there. In Circles, I think, is one of their greatest songs. Yeah, you can't. Don't skip it. I mean, there's a piano ballad in the middle. Some folks I've seen some, folks say, well, it gets slower in the second half, or, it drops off in quality or whatever. But to me, the piano ballad in the middle kind of has a shift to it. But to me, that was the same as hearing like,
you're talking about the Fortune Scherzo.
I am going to commend you for trying to pronounce that. I intentionally did not, because I have no idea. But yeah,
I was listening to that one and it's like, well, this is weird. What the hell is this? And then it hit me. This is a waltz.
Exactly.
It's literally a waltz.
Yes.
How will they know just where to find under this bridge I lie down?
So maybe that's your My Chemical Romance, right? The Black Wall. We're tying it all together.
Yeah. It was definitely a weird one, but it does kind of fit in the album. It's like almost like an intermission.
And to me, it reminded me of one of my other favorite albums, The Replacements' Let It Be, when the song Androgynous comes up and it's got that sort of piano ballad in the middle. And you're like, at first you're like, this doesn't really fit, or does it? And then when you listen to it all the way through, and it kind of, you're right, intermission, and it sort of takes you off, because then it goes into
Shadows.
Yeah, Shadows and 48. And Shadows is a fantastic song, but it starts off a little bit slower. So it's almost like,
it finishes very strong, though.
It's like perfect sequences. Yeah.
When the shadows
again, I think it's just, especially that 1, 2, 3 punch of 7 in Circles, songs about an angel, or even 4, and then you go to Round and 47. You just can't. You got to listen to it all. I highly recommend that.
Yeah, I liked Round a lot. say you got track 1, 7, track 2 in circles, track 3 is songs about an angel, and those are, say it's good 1, 2, 3, and then track 4 it picks up that energy, because track 3 kind of does slows it down a little bit, but then Round really kind of just brings that energy back to it.
Round is a highlight. And to go off on a little tangent here, there's a band called Deaf Heaven. I don't know if you're familiar with them or not, but came out with some pretty heavy metal, real dark, kind of metal records. And then their last album, Infinite Granite, took a complete shift, and it sounds more akin to this record. And I think Round is essentially like a blueprint for that album, which is sort of strange, but the interplay of lyrics and the heaviness. And so I say that just to say that it's still, I think another reason why I love this record so much is because you can see sort of sprinkles of it, or at least I can in other genres of music that I also love, or so keep coming back to, or that still speak to me today, sonically at least. Yeah.
Sonically, I could revisit this album anytime. Every single track, except for maybe the waltz, that's not one I'm going to rock out to.
Okay.
And then there's where is it? Grendel.
You're skipping that one?
I don't know what the fuck that was.
Okay.
that one kind of threw me. I did like when the music finally kicked in, but it was a bit of nonsense, and this is coming from a Pink Floyd fan where say Roger Waters can spout Scottish gibberish for 30 minutes and I'm enjoying it. So yeah, Grendel didn't really click with me, but the rest, pretty much every other track aside from those two, I could easily put in a playlist, listen anytime for the music. Not necessarily the lyrics don't like speak to me, but yeah. That's a solid band playing together there.
Yeah, totally. And I will say this as a Sunny Day fan, and their second album is more of and it's called LP2. They spent a lot of time coming up with the title for it. Is more of a cohesive. It's a better record, for them overall. I think it's the more cohesive of the two LPs that they put out when they were originally together.
But they kind of broke up like right after that.
Yeah.
Right?
It's sort of, so, they started falling apart right after that. I think Jeremy, the lead singer, became a born again Christian. And then right around that time, Dave Grohl had just recorded the first Foo Fighters record and was looking for a backing band. And whether this is true or not, I believe the story goes that he went to see Sunny Day play and then got in touch with Nate and Will, the bass player and the drummer, to see if they were interested in touring and riding on, right behind that first Foo Fighters record. And then
he just poached them.
Yeah. Well, I think the band was pretty much over with at that time anyway. Sunny Day Real Estate was. And I think, Jeremy was taking a different path. Yeah. So like I said, Nate's been in the Foo Fighters ever since. I believe.
But they got a different drummer. Taylor Hawkins, I think is her drummer.
Yeah. I think the story goes, Will was sort of, he didn't click with Dave. They were pretty much hired guns because Dave had recorded everything on that record. And I can only imagine trying to fill the drum seat of Dave Grohl. Yeah. And then when they were recording,
because even the video for Everlong has Taylor in there.
Yeah. So I think Will was on the first tour with them. And then when they went to record their second record, I think he was in the recording session. And I believe, whether this is hearsay or what, I think Dave went and then re-recorded all of his drum parts and, offered to take him, as a hired gun, to play to be the live drummer. And I think Will just said no. And that's when Taylor entered the fold there. I could be wrong on that, but I'm pretty sure that we'll just say that's foo lore at this point.
There you go. That'll work. It makes sense though. Just the Seattle music scene is a small community. A lot of interchangeable, as far as collaborations up there.
Yeah, totally. Well, and it's weird too that, not weird, but I think, especially with Sunny Day, because to me, we're getting this all, especially in a small town where we're at, where we're from, and at that time, we were sort of getting everything all at once, right? So there was, Sunny Days on Sub Pop or Nirvana's on Sub Pop. So they must have grown up together and all that kind of stuff. But Sunny Day is a different sort of generation than those guys, than Nirvana and those guys. They're a little bit younger. Nirvana's first record is 87 or 88 with Bleach. And I think they might only be like 5 or 6 years younger, but that's a big difference when you're, 22, 23 years old.
Oh, absolutely.
And, so when they're putting out this record, it's almost like I said, Nirvana's already huge. Grunge is the Seattle sound. There's, Mark Jacobs flannel shows and flannel, all of that is, maxed out to the nth degree. And so this was sort of something new, that I learned in hindsight, looking back on it, that I wasn't really aware of at the time. To me, it was just, it just spoke to me in a way, the same way that, a Nirvana record did, or Soundgarden did, or, all of those bands that I loved. And it was just strange to me. I didn't understand why Sunny Day wasn't the biggest band in the world and no one else, loved them as much as I did seemingly at the time. But it makes sense in hindsight, and here, it feels silly saying that now because it is such a, it's a fans of emo and sort of that genre. I'm not doing it justice here on the podcast because it's a seminal record to them and a cornerstone, the blueprint for all those bands that you had mentioned before. But to me, I was coming at it sort of with that, those bands that I love, that Nirvana, even band, Fugazi, like I said, I heard the Smiths in it, the aggressiveness that I loved from, Metallica, early Metallica records. I heard that in Sunny Day.
Okay.
And then by the time emo really takes off, I was sort of off on a different path.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where I sort of, I love those early bands like the Promise Ring, like I mentioned before. I do, Jimmy Eat World and some of those bands I think are great, but then I started going into more, that's what, like when Wilco's coming out and sort of the alt country stuff is, becoming bigger and I was more mainstream rock than emo, I guess.
Yeah. Those types of bands in those albums, I discovered years later. Yeah. That's just, I wasn't listening to, I mentioned this on Mike's. I wasn't staying up and watching Alternative Nation or 120 Minutes. I wasn't really doing that. I would occasionally catch Headbangers Ball. That was kind of more what I was listening to. It was either that or classic rock. I had a large influence from my dad, cousin, and uncles as far as like in '94. I was super pumped about the Hell Freezes Over Eagles reunion coming out.
Yeah.
And 94, that was my musical world. Was why is nobody else caring about this? The Eagles are reuniting. What, no one cares. And I was just kind of alone with that one, but I was cool with that because the Eagles are just phenomenal. But it was always in reverse that I was like, well, let me go back and listen to that album, Nevermind. Let me go back and listen to 10. Let me go back and listen to Siamese Dream. And then on the backside of high school in the Hank's garage, that's where all that music came together. Everything from like the past 8 years, the late 80s and then early 90s, all just so many CDs in that garage. But this wasn't one of them.
Interesting.
I don't ever remember Sunny Day making that playlist there, which is a shame because it's an excellent album. But we had Oasis in there and other things.
Oh yeah, great stuff. Yeah,
but this would have fit. It really would have. But I had never. I mean, I heard Seven many times, but I could never have told you who sang it.
Yeah,
it was just a song that you'd hear. But where we grew up, there wasn't You know, it's not like we were in a city where there were touring shows and posters. You know, you had to seek out a record store somewhere to find some of this stuff. And like I said, Prue Mall, you had Disc Jockey, that's about it, or Sam Goody. And if you weren't staying up late and watching MTV, which is a shame, MTV doesn't have that musical influence anymore, because it was such a good thing at the time, but the internet changes things.
Right.
But this is I'm glad you brought this. I never would have really listened to this one before.
Cool. Yeah, it's so weird to think about too. Is it's almost I think where we're at age wise. It's weird to think about. There was a time where those influences were. I got Injustice for All, which is weird now, but Michael, your past guest, my cousin, bought it for me from the spinner rack at Valley News and Booze because it was on there. And it was like my 8th birthday, and I have an 8-year-old now, and I'm thinking, oh my goodness. But just remember having that on my headphones, and that brought me into a different world. And had I not seen one on Headbangers Ball, I might not have known who Metallica was. But then getting influences, we were talking before we started recording about sort of listening to records and stuff growing up, and like influential to me was, so my parents in the, being born in the early 80s, me, not my parents, listening to their records. And then, it would be Pink Floyd, The Wall. And my mom would have, John Cougar. He was still John Cougar then, John Cougar Mellencamp. But on the radio, it's Prince and it's Springsteen and it's, all of these seminal artists that, now you take for granted as canon. But this is when they're making those big records, and then having, babysitters come over and listening to, Poison or Wham or, whoever. And then my cousins were big into the 80s hair metal scene. And then my other cousin was, into this, turned me on to the Smiths and television, The Cure, who I absolutely, love, and then it's been talked to death, and then it's Nirvana. And, for me, it was Nirvana and Pearl Jam, and hearing 10 for the first time, just, being in the 10 club is the longest relationship I've ever had in my life. That's a whole other podcast, but it's, it's sort of that love of growing up on that classic rock, but then falling in love, hearing like Appetite for Destruction, that 70s where now it's dirty and it's bluesy and it's heavy. And then you're getting into, Soundgarden and then Nirvana and Pearl Jam, like I said, and then, Alice in Chains comes out and the Pumpkins and the great Chicago scene, but you're getting it in bits and pieces. And I think that's what was, which was really different than here. And really to me, the first time, I heard this record, but the first time I really fell in love with it is when I got a car, and it was I had an 83 Datsun Maxima. This is how old we are.
Nice.
And it had a cassette deck, and it was so small that if I sat up straight, my head would fit through the sunroof, but it had the cassette deck. And I just remember I had this, and I think like the Talking Heads, Sand in the Vaseline greatest hits, and like a couple others that I would have, but the ultimate Midwest, rite of passage that I still love to this day. The windows are down, the radio's up, and just, this is one of those records that I highly encourage everyone, if you can, if you have a CD player, you Bluetooth, whatever, hook it up, just roll the windows down, crank it up, just drive. It's just fantastic. And I think that's when I really fell in love with it. But it was, on my Walkman a lot as well. And it's always just been a part of my life. I didn't listen to it, or it's not something I go back to often, but it's just always on. It's just so weird. It just always comes up.
Now, did you stay a Sunny Day fan throughout their tenure? Because I think they got like 3.5 albums.
I have to say, so they've the first two I loved. Then, like I said, they took a little break. They've released some stuff. They've gotten back together a few times. I've listened to those records. I can't say that they don't speak to me in that same way as this does. I think this is, Diary is just something. I respect them for what they are, those records, and I think they're great and worth listening to. And again, to me, LP2 is the more sort of complete record, but Diary to me is just just that visceral feeling that it gives me. so, I'm blabbering, but a longer way to say that I haven't kept up with them the way that I have with other bands, but that was also because they were taking, intermittent releases, and they were taking breaks and on again, off again, and that sort of stuff.
Yeah. Without the consistency of being a fully collaborative band over the years, it'd be hard to stay up to date with them, because you never really know what their current status is or if they're going to put something else out. And like you said, the one guy's still in the Foo Fighters, so that's a hard gig to give up there. It almost feels like a lightning in a bottle, kind of a moment. This album, with the way they came together, the music they put out, and you've got on an indie label, Sub Pop, almost like a hard to repeat sort of instance.
Yeah, I could see that. Again, it's very, I'm pausing. I'm cautious with it just because, to me, and I think at the time this was like Sub Pop's like second biggest record behind Nirvana's when it first came out, and I think at one point it was like their seventh. Still, a decade or two later, it was still their like seventh selling record of all time. And you're talking about like the Postal Service and Fleet Foxes and some of the huge names that Sub Pop has had on their roster and continue to put out. So it is a massive record that gets its due. Again, I think that second record is fantastic, but you're right. I think whatever it is, and it's like any band, trying to stay together and trying to keep things going. And it just seems like they were in completely different places. Jeremy becomes a born again Christian, which I imagine causes, strife between himself and, the lifestyle and who knows, this is conjecture on my point, but it just seems, and by the time now you're getting into the mid to late 90s and early 2000s, and the landscape is completely changed in terms of what's popular and what's not popular. And, who knows? It's definitely, it came out in the right time for me and for a lot of folks. But I don't know if, had it come out a few years earlier or a few years later, if it would have made a difference, if they would have stayed together or what.
Before we go on to the short list, what are your favorite tracks on this album?
Well, it's cliche, but the first two, 7 and In Circles, are fantastic to me. If you want to get across what Sunny Day is about in 2 songs, play somebody those 2 songs or listen to those 2 songs.
I can see that.
Round, like you mentioned, is also, I've got it highlighted in my notes here, and I think we touched on it here, but I wanted to make sure I talked about that. Those 3 for sure. I do love Songs About an Angel. Shadows, I think, is fantastic. But if I had to choose only 1 or 2 songs off the record, I would say In Circles and then 7.
I thought the album ended really strong with Sometimes, and I wanted to make a note about that. It's a unique song on the album, but the full band kicks in midway through the song, and because I started out thinking this is the ending. Okay. All right.
Yeah.
But then the full band kicks in and I changed my feeling on the song, and it really is a strong finale on the album.
That's a great point. Yeah.
No words to explain while you threw away my name from your mind while you drowned out my heart.
Well, and I think too, we were talking about the waltz and some of those moments on it where you're like, oh, what is happening? And then when the band kicks in or something, to think that this was the debut record and, the sort of this shift in, I keep talking about the Seattle sound, but the shift in that and what I was talking about before is almost that, I don't know if it's a generational divide, but between those big records coming out of Seattle right before, and then this record is, think of all the different genres that are on this record and, putting a waltz on or having those quiet moments. And it's not like loud, quiet, loud, or whatever, the Nirvana formula or the Pixies formula. It was just done in such a different way and different time signatures. And I think there's a lot going on this record that the more, in fact, I was just listening to it before we got on again, just, I've been playing it over and over again, but I was listening to it on headphones and I was hearing parts of like Nate's bass parts on some songs again for the first time, if you will. And I think there's just a lot of great musicianship again on this. And it's a record that you can spend time with. I've spent, 30 plus years with it, and still I'm hearing something new. So I think it is a great record for diving into, being able to get something new out of it every time you listen to it. And that speaks to sort of those things that the band was, I guess, the chances they were willing to take. And like you mentioned on, this is the way you're going to end an album. And then the full band kicks in and you're like, oh my, brings you back.
Yeah, exactly.
If you have it on repeat, it brings you right back into, the jump start and the fiery way they kick off the record.
I think a lot of that credit can also go to Brad Wood, who produced it.
Totally.
And that's a guy who worked with like Liz Phair and the Pumpkins.
And this record was recorded in Chicago because of that reason, because of those bands you just mentioned and their sounds and success. So maybe that's why I love it, because it's a Chicago record.
Chicago record with a Seattle lineup. I mean, that's the perfect marriage right there.
But
right?
You mentioned Liz Phair and those bands, the scene and the Pumpkins and the scene that's going on in Chicago and Brad at the time and just fantastic, So, and I think you can hear that in this record as well.
So Diary made your top spot. What was on your short list?
I'm showing it for the listeners. I've got a list of like 50, and I won't go through them all, but I mentioned like Injustice for All. That really changed. It was the first sort of me record, if you will, the first record that I had of my own, that it wasn't my parents' music. And I don't mean that like in a bad way, but it wasn't something they had shown me or like everyone was listening to at the time. Like I would listen to it in headphones and it would, scare me and excite me. And I'm like 8 or 9 and it's a pretty heavy record. The Cure's Disintegration, I think, is an absolute masterpiece, which I could go on and on about. That band I think it's fantastic. They've got something new in the works coming out too, so I can't wait to hear that. Nevermind, of course, was a game changer and something I still listen to a lot. Then there's like some great like the Hold Steady. I don't know if you listen to the Hold Steady at all. Yeah. Great band. Yeah,
my wife turned me on to them.
They are fantastic. I think Boys and Girls in America is a masterpiece by them. One that I was really close to scrapping Sunny Day, not scrapping, but changing was Wallflowers by Tom Petty. I think that's a good one. Is just unbelievable in the way released in 94. And you're thinking all of this is going on. And here Tom is making this record with Rick Rubin and, does he still have it in him? And he's going through, it's a solo record, even though most of the band is on, Heartbreakers are on it. And, it's his divorce record, but he's the only one who knows he's getting a divorce at the time. It's just, and the songwriting and it's still.
Yeah, I got the chance to see Tom Petty the year before he died.
Oh, fantastic!
And it was a fluke. Just some friends of ours like, hey, we got 2 extra tickets to Tom Petty. Like, yeah, sure, we'll go. And it was a great show.
Oh, unbelievable!
Really, really good. And there's I had to go out and buy it, his anthology, because there is a 12-minute version of "It's Good to Be King."
Yeah, fantastic.
And that version is just, it has yet to leave my main playlist.
Oh, it's fantastic. Yeah. Just that there's a great documentary about the recording of that album. I forget the title of it now, but worth the watch. I mean, you can't go wrong with Petty. I mean, he's as an American rock icon, obviously. Other albums that changed really, like The Replacements, Let It Be. We were talking about, the record stores and stuff. I actually got that at a record store in LaSalle. I don't know if you ever remember hearing their records in LaSalle. It was sort of down by, it was downtown LaSalle, not too far from where like the Uptown, maybe a little bit further down the block.
Okay.
From there. And when I was like 13, I was 13 and started doing a community theater at Stage 212, which is the theater there. And started acting and stuff. And that was another great way to hear music from God, because being 13 and you're in plays with, men and women, in college or high school who are listening to stuff.
Yeah.
I walked in there. Somebody was like, "Hey, we're going to the store." Walked in there and I had no idea, I'm 13 years old or something. And the guy behind the counter was asking me what I was listening to and stuff. And he's like, "Well, you have to hear this record." And it didn't even have a cover. It was just like somebody had it. It just said "Let It Be" in pen. And it was like $3 or something. And it was obviously used and like it was all worn off. And like it didn't have song titles. And I played that until it broke. It's still a masterpiece to me. There's some newer records Neil Young, Crazy Horse Zuma is on my short list. I think that's unbelievable record.
Yeah.
There's some newer bands that I absolutely, a band called Japan Droids out of Canada. They have a great record called Celebration Rock. If you're into the Hold Steady, even I'm going to say Springsteen, not in the way that they sound, but in the context of the lyrics and that working class and passion. Highly recommend that record. And then there's a band out of, it's actually one guy, but a band out of Indiana called Strand of Oaks. He's putting out, his name's Tim Showalter, and he's been putting out fantastic records for a long time. But sort of the record that got him a wider audience, a record called Heal, is I cannot recommend it enough. Jay Mascis from Dinosaur Jr. Plays guitar on one song. So that's sort of the genre, but it just a beautiful songwriter. If you love the Pumpkins, if you love Diary after you hear it, or Siamese Dream, especially. But it goes off from there. He's a very great songwriter. If you think of bands like maybe the War on Drugs, who I love, their new record is fantastic. Kurt Vile, he's got sort of interplays of that going on. So I love that record. But yeah, there's just so many. Counting Crows, August and Everything After, from start to finish. Soul
I got a friend that wants to bring that one in next season.
It's fantastic.
It is a good album, yes.
And I didn't realize, so that was one of the cassettes that growing up, with the cassette players, and you could bring stuff in, and it started with like, big one for me was Bon Jovi's New Jersey, which, come on, is a fantastic record. It is. Yeah. John can write songs, man. I'll be there for you. Come on. These 5 words, I swear to you.
That's one that I have to unfortunately give credit to my sister, who's 2 years older than me. So when in the 80s, that was blasting in our house from her room.
Bon Jovi, my first t-shirt, my first band t-shirt ever, which I still have, is my dad bought me a Bon Jovi t-shirt. It's about, a size child small or something. But just a fantastic songwriter. There's just so many, but going back to Counting Crows, it's one of those records where, like even listening to it now, I didn't realize, or where I was going with this anyway. It was one of those cassettes that I could play in the van, and my parents really dug it too. My parents, I'll give them credit. Yeah. They love Nevermind. My dad loves Nevermind, loves Nirvana, and they're, really, they love the Counting Crows and stuff. And growing up, and heard it was just great rock music, but then as I got older, just the lyrics and how Adam just riding through his depression and all that sort of stuff, and it reminds me of the same way, listening back to it now, with hindsight and sort of life experience, it reminds me of listening to Soul Asylum's Grave Dancers Union. And I say that because everybody knows Runaway Train and the video, but if you sit down and like listen to the lyrics of that song, and, Dave is riding through his depression and, called you up in the middle of the night, like a firefly looking for a light. I was a little out of touch, little insane, it's just easier than dealing with the pain. And he's, it's the same way. It's just fantastic songwriting is I guess what I'm trying to say, but it's cool to have those records, growing up and you're listening to them and then being able to revisit them now and getting so much more out of them. Which is a gigantic bonus of this project. Fantastic. And I do have to mention, revisit it all. There is one record that I absolutely loved growing up, Gin Blossom's New Miserable Experience. And I had that. Hey Jealousy. And so if you don't know the backstory of that band, I highly recommend looking it up. They're from Arizona. What I didn't know about the time, is that the main guy in that band, Doug Hopkins, who wrote all the lyrics, he ends up, getting booted from the band. He's a pretty bad alcoholic. Gets ended up booting from the band, like right as they make it big. But he wrote some of those earlier songs, and if you go through and listen to that record, you can tell it's very much it's a darker record than, you can think about it. And one of the famous, like, Hey Jealousy, one of the things that he was bummed about is when they released it, they reworded his lyrics, but it was like, the way it's released is, you can trust me not to think and not to sleep around, from Hey Jealousy. But he actually wrote it, you can trust me not to drink and not to sleep around. And it's all about, you can see I'm no shape for driving in any way. I've got no place to go. And it's just, but when you hear it, it's that poppy, it's that you're going back to today, right? And Smashing Pumpkins, and it's joyful, and you're getting a kick out of it, especially when you're a kid and you have no life experience. And then you're like, oh my God, this guy was dealing with,
there's a lot of songs from our teenage years that just, you rock out to, and then you go back and you look at the lyrics like, wow, maybe that's why we're singing that. Maybe that's why our generation is doing so well.
Exactly. Our therapists thank the pop artists from our generation.
The killer in me is the killer in you.
Oh, send a smile over to you. Yeah, just there's so many good records, Steve. That's what, like I said, it was not hyperbole when you had asked me to be on. I automatically got.
Hold on, wait. I want to touch on that, but then you go back and you listen to a lot of like Beatles.
Oh yeah,
same thing. I mean, these are some great, snappy radio hits, and just everyone can tap your foot. But then when you dive into the lyrics, you're either thinking, what are they on? What are they talking about? Or there's so many interpretations.
I remember,
but at the time, it's just kind of, that's a great song, and then move on to the next.
I remember singing along to like Maxwell's Silver Hammer, as a 3 and a 4-year-old. It was almost like a lullaby, and then you're like, oh wait, this is literally about a serial killer killing people with his hammer. What are we doing? I think I actually have it on I made a Beatles for Baby playlist when my daughter was born, just to have it playing.
I have that.
Nice.
I've got it. Yeah. My both my kids, that was their lullabies.
Yeah. And I think that might be on it or something. And I was just like, oh my God, I hope they aren't hearing the lyrics.
Yeah. I remember one of my more favorite tunes growing up from the White Album was Happiness is a Warm Gun.
Unbelievable.
And I would know, I would sing every word. And then, later on, like, I was singing that at what age? That's oh, wow.
Yeah. Isn't it crazy? It's such a great.
And that's not even getting into the 90s hip hop that,
that's
everyone had to, that's another world.
I remember getting in trouble because I'm a big lyrics guy, and I would write down lyrics to my favorite song. When you're in high school and you're supposed to be taking notes, I would write down lyrics to my favorite songs, see if I could remember them and stuff. Well, I started doing that with like hip hop songs, and like my parents would find like, gin and juice lyrics. And I had no idea, I'm just writing stuff down. Like what you're shooting? What is this iced tea?
Well, my mom was real big into show tunes.
Okay.
So, all the classic musicals, your Sound of Music, Oklahoma, et cetera. Mm-hmm. But Grease was very popular. She loved it.
Oh my God.
Loved it. The movie Grease was on quite a bit.
Yeah.
And I knew every word of that particular one. And then it was years later, I think I was in the Army at the time. I just remember seeing the song Grease Lightning with subtitles on. And you start seeing, all the chicks are creaming and stuff. Like, oh,
yeah.
I never noticed these lyrics.
Yeah.
I was like, wow.
Did she put up a fight? Tell me more. What?
Yeah. Then you get into that area of it.
What are we doing here? Yeah. And you're singing it like crazy. It would be at every like dance, you're singing at the top of your lungs, and isn't this a cute song? I think the 7th graders put it on to play. Yeah. You're like, oh, okay. Different time.
It's about the 50s.
Apparently that was okay in the 50s. And when you watch the movie, apparently it was okay for 30-year-olds to be in high school in the 50s, because there's no way those are high school students. I think Rizzo might be, I think she might be like 40 or 50, the actress when in that movie.
Yeah. Stockard Channing.
Yeah.
Has
I couldn't think of her name.
Yeah. She has been like the same age ever since Grease, it seems like.
Yeah. Well, once you hit your mid 30s, if you take care of yourself. Yeah.
They're singing Summer Nights. They've got almost full beards, a couple of them, and just
right.
That's
Unreal.
right.
Unreal. It is amazing though when you go back and listen to even like the songs of the day. We're talking about like Prince, like Little Red Corvette, when
Prince lyrics. Oh, that's a whole nother podcast there.
Got a pocket full of horses. Some of them are used. You're like, oh, there's a Little Red Corvette. It's playing at the Spring Valley Pool, and we're all singing along to it. What is it? Pocket full of horses, Trojans, and some of them were used, I think is the lyric.
Or is the Little Nicky or Nicky Darling or something like that?
Darling Nicky, yeah.
Darling Nicky, that's it. Yeah, there's some crazy Prince lyrics.
Yeah. But we're singing along to them. We have no idea.
Well, I mean, I was probably 6 or 7 singing Billie Jean.
Oh yeah. Weren't we all?
Not having a clue what I'm singing. That's. Yeah.
I think it's so funny too, because I'm, as a parent now, and you're doing all those things you swore you would never do. Like, but then a song will come on. I'm like, oh my, what are they singing? That's filthy. And they have no idea, and it's,
none.
We do like the Kids Bop version of songs. So they edit it and stuff. And then I make the mistake of they want to listen to it. So I just put it on thing, what's the name of the song you want to hear? And you're like, oh wait, this is not the edited version. And they have no idea, but it's like, what are we singing about? Yeah.
Yeah. There's a lot of those. We have the same, Kids Bop revelation now and then when they hear the actual song.
Yeah. And I didn't think anything about it, or when they tell people that their favorite song is, by Megan Thee Stallion, because they've heard the Kids Bop version, and then you get those weird side glances, and I'm like, I don't think,
But I can die happy if I never hear Old Town Road again, either version. So, God, that's a horrible song.
Honestly, it was, for me, the breaking point was, took my daughter to see JoJo Siwa a couple summers ago. If you haven't had the joy of JoJo, and they started playing that song on the loudspeaker before she came on, and the place just went crazy. Like the kids were going like screaming and crazy. And it was just the culmination of everything that was going on and what I was about to endure. And God bless her, JoJo and her fans. And she's a very talented young lady, but, I'm a middle-aged man, and it was just the culmination of all that, where I'm like, so now I just equate that song with my discomfort. It's a great song though. Little Nas has got it going on, man.
I feel that I'm doing something right, because I'm going off I'm trying to pull my kids away, and my 5-year-old daughter will repeatedly ask me for the Bad Teacher song. And I'll put on the whole of Another Brick in the Wall, 1, Happiest Days of Our Lives, and part 2. She loves the whole thing.
Oh, that's
sings
fantastic.
Along to it. Doesn't know what she's singing, and I'm okay with that. To any people, critiquing my parenting, it's Pink Floyd, and she's going to listen to it.
Fantastic. So yeah, we've constantly got stuff going on here. It's the same, and that makes you so happy, doesn't it?
It truly does. To hear her singing along, just hey, teacher, this is so cute.
Yeah.
As long as she doesn't do that. Yeah, at school.
Yeah, at school.
I gotta
right. You gotta
reel that in. But
although there would be a sense of pride if you got called in and had to sit down and your little one's yelling, "Leave those kids alone," to your teacher. You might be okay with that. I would have pride anyway.
Yeah, I might have to kind of smile, reprimand her, like, "Don't do that again."
Yeah. We'll talk when we get home. High five on the way out. No, it's great. It's funny that
I haven't played her anything else from that album. That might be a bit too much. She doesn't need to sing any other lyrics from The Wall. That might trauma her.
Probably not. Oh, it is so great though when they're listening to something or like I'll have something on and they're like, "Oh, what is that?" Or they'll catch something, and it's just like, "Oh, okay, we're doing okay."
I've got an opening. Let me play you something.
Right. I know we're going to rebel and you're going to have your own thing, and that's fantastic. But we've got to get this foundation in. You've got to have a jumping off point. There's a few that they'll request. Went through a big Dead phase not too long ago. I got into the Dead later in life, but my kids call them the Teddy Bear Band. So they want to listen to the Teddy Bear Band sometimes. And I'm like, all right.
My kids have oddly zeroed in on Good Charlotte recently.
Okay.
Because their debut album was one that I was considering. I really, really like that album.
Gotcha.
So I was listening to it all the way through, and that's one that they'll request, and I'm happy to oblige. It's a great album, and
nice.
it's pretty tame lyrically, and and it's boppy. They can move their heads. It's not kids bop. It's actually a nice pop punk from the early 2000s, and I'm all for it.
Oh, that's fantastic. Yeah, you got to get them into their own stuff. But a lot of the Beatles stuff the kids listen to. My daughter got into, she listens to so for all the parents out there, this is when the comments come in, but the Hamilton soundtrack. And so my wife got her the Hamilton for Kids sort of book, and they read along with it and what the songs meant and then the history of it, so it was a history lesson and listening to it at the same time, but she just loved it. And so then that started a whole other, she wanted to hear more music that sounded like that. So she wanted to hear more like rap music, and, so then we had, then it got into show tunes. So I would play her, some of my Broadway favorite songs. And so it was sort of a jumping off point of sorts.
Sit her down and make her watch 1776.
Yeah.
There you go. Get you.
That's coming up. Yeah.
Yeah.
Dad's watching the History Channel.
It's one of my favorites.
Yeah. Yeah. We haven't quite gotten there yet. They won't let me man the TV. I'm trying, but the History Channel is where they tune out.
All right. Well, before we wrap this up, please tell our listeners what you're working on, if they can find you anywhere, or anything you'd like to pitch.
I got nothing, Steve. I don't really.
Perfectly fine.
No, I've got nothing. I just, nothing to pitch really. I would just say, like we were talking about before, to any listeners out there, if you haven't heard a record before, that's on this episode or anything to mention, either from this episode or other episodes, go back and listen to it, give it a listen for the first time, for the 500th time. And just, I think that's what's so great about music, is you can keep going back and listening to it and discovering new bands and new things. And whether it came out 20 years ago or whether it came out 20 minutes ago, to discover something new and to go back, I would just implore your listeners to do that, which I'm sure they are, since they're listening to this podcast.
Excellent point. I will take your pitch time though, and just let everybody know out there that future episodes are up on our Patreon. So feel free to support the show if you want to hear the episodes before everybody else. And also check out our other podcast, which is Cinema Decon, where we talk about old movies from the 80s, 90s, and 2000s. It's a pretty good time wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts, and, subscribe, do all that good stuff that, podcasters are supposed to say.
What are we supposed to say? Smash the subscribe button, or is that YouTube? My influencers are kind of off.
Smash that like button.
Smash that like button, bro.
Yeah.
Is that what the kids are saying? Did we get that one right?
Something like that. I try to avoid the cliches as much as I can, but
I'm just trying to fit in. I'm trying to skew the younger demographic. Just talked about a 35-year-old record, so I figured we'd get him with the lingo.
Yeah, the 90s were great. Well, Danny, I'd like to thank you for your time today. It was a pleasure to sit and talk with you about Diary from Sunny Day Real Estate.
Thanks for having me, Steve. This was fantastic. Good catching up, and looking forward to future episodes, man. Like I said, I've been listening to them a lot and hearing stuff again for the first time, or hearing stuff for the first time as well. And love what you're doing, and keep up the good work, man. Again, thanks for having me. It was a lot of fun.
Thanks. I appreciate that. Thank you for listening to Music Rewind, a podcast from the Sidereal Media Group. And as I always say, listen to the full album. Until next time.
A podcast from the Sidereal Media Group. Back to you, anchors.